It's where you sleep, where you relax, where you should feel the most comfortable. But for Daniel, his home became something else. Something he could never escape. And it all started with a noise. Daniel was 26 when he moved into his new house. It was a rental, but it was nice, 2 bedrooms, a big backyard, and a basement for storage. The only weird thing? There was a crawl space. A narrow, dark hole in the basement wall, leading into complete blackness. The landlord didn't mention it when he moved in. And Daniel didn't think much of it, at first. The first few nights in the house were normal. Quiet. Peaceful. Then, one night, while Daniel was watching TV, he heard something. A soft thud. From the basement. Daniel paused. Listened. Another thud. Like something heavy shifting below the floor. His stomach tightened. He told himself it was the house settling. Old pipes. Something normal. But then, it happened again. Daniel grabbed his phone and slowly made his way to the basement door. It was dead silent. He hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the door. The basement was pitch black. He turned on the light. And as the bulb flickered to life, his blood went cold. The crawl space door was open. Daniel froze. He was sure that door had been closed before. It was just a small wooden panel. The darkness inside was impenetrable. Like something could be hiding in there. Watching. Waiting. Daniel swallowed hard. Slowly stepped closer. He raised his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it inside. The crawl space stretched back into nothingness. Just dirt walls. Empty. But the air inside. It smelled wrong. Rotten. Like something had been living in there. Daniel closed the crawl space door. Shoved a heavy box in front of it. Told himself it was just air pressure. Or maybe the landlord left it open by accident. But deep down, something didn't feel right. For the next few nights, Daniel tried to ignore it. But the noises kept happening. Soft shuffling. Quiet scraping. Always coming from the basement. Always near the crawl space. And then, one night, around 2 a.m., it got worse. Daniel was lying in bed when he heard it. A new sound. Not a thud. Not a scrape. But a whisper. Faint. Muffled. Coming through the vent. "I know you're awake." Daniel's body locked up. His heart started pounding. There was someone in the house. He grabbed the baseball bat next to his bed. Crept toward the vent. Listened. Silence. Then, a breath. Long. Slow. Right on the other side. Daniel ripped open the vent. Nothing. Just empty ductwork. But the metal inside. It was warm. Like someone had just. Daniel didn't sleep that night. First thing in the morning, he called the landlord. Told him someone might be living in the vents or the crawl space. The landlord just laughed. "Man, you're the third guy to say that. It's just the pipes." The third guy? Daniel's stomach sank. He had to know. That afternoon, he went down to the basement. The crawl space door was closed. The box he put in front of it was pushed aside. His hands started shaking. He grabbed his flashlight. And with a deep breath, he opened the door. The stench hit him instantly. Worse than before. Like rotting meat. He aimed the light inside. The dirt walls were covered in scratches. Long. Deep. Like fingernails clawing at the surface. And then, he saw it. Something stuffed into the far corner. A mattress. Stained. Ripped. And next to it, a pile of bones. Tiny. Human. Daniel stumbled backward. His breath was coming in shaky gasps. He reached for his phone. Then he heard it. "Hello," shuffling sound. From inside the crawl space. Something was moving. Something was coming toward him. Daniel dropped his flashlight. Ran. He bolted up the basement stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Slammed the door. Locked it. Pressed his ear against the wood. Silence. Then, a soft creak. From the other side. And a voice. Right against the door. Why did you?" Daniel didn't respond. Didn't breathe. Just stood there, heart pounding. Then, the knob twisted. Slowly. Back and forth. Like someone was testing it. Trying to see if it was unlocked. Then, silence. Whoever, or whatever, was down there had gone quiet. Waiting. Daniel called the police. When they arrived, they found no one. But in the crawl space, they found something else. A tunnel. Leading under the house. And inside? A nest. Old blankets. Empty cans. And a notebook. Full of names. Dates. Markings. And at the bottom of the last page, Daniel's name. And the words, "He's finally alone." Daniel moved out that same night. He never found out who, or what, had been living there. But sometimes, when he's home alone, he swears he can still hear it. A soft, raspy breath. Coming from the vents. Watching. Waiting. Stay safe out there. There's something unsettling about seeing people where they shouldn't be. A person standing too still in an empty parking lot. A figure watching from a window in an abandoned house. But for a guy named Ryan, it was the man on the sidewalk. The man who wouldn't stop grinning. Ryan was 19 at the time. He was living in a small college town, working late shifts at a diner to pay for school. One night, after finishing up a shift around 2 a.m., he started walking home. It wasn't a long walk, just a few blocks through quiet, empty streets. At that hour, the whole town felt dead. No cars, no people, just the occasional streetlight buzzing overhead. But as Ryan turned onto his street, he saw someone. A man. Standing on the sidewalk, just ahead of him. At first, Ryan didn't think much of it. Just some guy, probably another late-night worker heading home. But as he got closer, something felt off. The man was too still. He wasn't walking. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't waiting for a ride. He was just standing there. Grinning. Ryan's stomach tightened. The man's grin was unnatural. It stretched too wide, like someone had carved it into his face. His teeth were too white, too straight, too perfect. And his eyes? They didn't blink. They were locked onto Ryan. Watching. Waiting. Ryan kept walking. He wasn't about to stop and ask questions. Boo, it was. Jerky. Like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. And the whole time, he kept grinning. Ryan's skin crawled. Something was seriously wrong with this guy. He picked up his pace. Didn't look back. Didn't want to. He turned the corner onto his street. His apartment building was just ahead. Almost home. Then, a shadow moved. Up ahead. Another figure. Standing on the sidewalk. Another grinning man. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. It was the same man. Same suit. Same wide, unnatural smile. But that was impossible. He had just left him behind. Ryan's hands turned cold. No way. No way he could have gotten here this fast. Unless he never moved at all. Ryan's body screamed at him to run. But the man. He started walking first. Straight toward him. Slow. Deliberate. And still grinning. Ryan's breath came in shallow gasps. His legs refused to move. The man was getting closer. Step. By. Step. Until Ryan bolted. He sprinted across the street, not caring if there were cars. Didn't look back. Didn't stop. He could hear footsteps behind him. Not running. Just walking. Slow, steady. Like the man knew Ryan couldn't escape. Ryan reached his apartment, shaking. Fumbled with his keys. Threw the door open and slammed it shut. For a long time, he just stood there. Listening. Heart pounding. But outside, there was only silence. Ryan barely slept that night. The next morning, he checked the street. The man was gone. But something told Ryan that wouldn't be the last time he saw him. Because ever since that night, every once in a while, when he's walking home alone, He catches a glimpse of someone too still. Too grinning. Watching. Waiting. Stay safe out there. Some houses just feel wrong. It's not something you can explain. It's not about creaky floors or flickering lights. It's just a feeling. A heavy, unshakable feeling that something is watching. Waiting. For Mark, that feeling started the day he moved into his new apartment. And it all began with events. Mark was 24 when he got his first place on his own. It was a small, one-bedroom apartment in an older building, nothing fancy, but affordable. The first time he saw it, he noticed something strange. The vents. There were too many of them. Most apartments had a few air vents for heating and cooling. But this place? There were dozens. Small vents near the ceiling. Large grates along the walls. Even a few weird, tiny ones inside the closets. Mark asked the landlord about it, but the guy just shrugged. Mimicking landlord's voice, casual, dismissive, old ventilation system. Just ignore him. At the time, Mark didn't think much of it. He should have. The first night in the apartment was uneventful. Mark unpacked, had a couple beers, watched TV. But as he was getting ready for bed, he heard it. A sound. Soft, faint. Coming from the vents. At first, it just sounded like airflow. Like the old system kicking in. But then, it changed. It started to sound like breathing. Mark froze. He turned down the TV. Listened. Long, slow inhales. Raspy, shaky exhales. It was faint, barely audible. But it was there. Coming from the large vent near the ceiling. Mark tried to shake it off. Probably just the old building settling. Yeah. That had to be it. But something about it made his skin crawl. Like the breathing was too close. Like it wasn't coming from the ducts. But from something inside them. Watching. Waiting. The next few nights, it got worse. Every time Mark went to bed, the breathing would start again. Sometimes it was deep and steady. Sometimes it was shallow and fast. But it was always there. He started sleeping with the TV on, just to drown it out. But then, something happened that he couldn't ignore. One night, around 3 a.m., Mark woke up to a new sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. He lay there, half asleep, until he realized. It was coming from the vent above his bed. Mark's body went cold. The tapping wasn't random. It was slow. Deliberate. Like fingertips. Tapping. On the metal grate. Mark sat up, heart pounding. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the vent. At first, he saw nothing. Just a dark, metal grate. But then, something moved. 2 fingers. Long. Thin. Sliding back into the shadows. Mark threw himself out of bed. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. He grabbed a chair and stood on it. Pulled out his screwdriver. And with shaking hands, he unscrewed the vent. The cover clattered to the floor. Mark aimed his phone flashlight into the vent, squinting into the darkness. And then, he saw it. Something huge. Hunched inside the narrow air duct. A human shape. But wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its fingers too thin. And its face. It had no eyes. Just a wide, open mouth. Grinning. Grinning way too wide. Mark staggered back. His stomach lurched. And then, the thing moved. Fast, it lunged forward, reaching out. Mark screamed. Fell off the chair. Scrambled backward across the floor. By the time he looked back up, the vent was empty. Mark didn't sleep. Didn't even turn the lights off. He sat there, staring at the open vent, waiting for it to return. But nothing happened. The next morning, he packed his bags. He didn't care about breaking his lease. Didn't care about losing his security deposit. He just left. A few weeks later, curiosity got the best of him. He looked up the building's history. It used to be an asylum. A long time ago. For the worst of the worst. Patients who were too violent. Too disturbed. One of them? A man who had torn out his own eyes. They had to keep him locked in the ventilation shafts, because he would crawl through them at night, whispering, watching, waiting. Stay safe out there.